congregation in Phoenix, Arizona. We're going to be doing another cooking YouTube. This time we're doing it for the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. And let me explain to you what we're doing and why we're doing it. We're going to be making an orange vanilla honey cake. And I'm going to explain first why we're doing this. The holiday of Rosh Hashanah is coming up in a couple of weeks. And it's traditional for the holiday to celebrate by having something sweet. And usually we think of apples and honey. And honey cake is also a treat that's been prepared for many, many years. And today we're going to be making kind of an easier version of it. We're going to be making our orange honey cake with, believe it or not, a box of gingerbread mix. That's right, gingerbread mix. That might sound a little strange to you, but we'll find out why and how we're going to incorporate this into our recipe. Rosh Hashanah is coming up, as I said, and it's been traditional to have something sweet for the new year, since we hope that our year ahead of us will give us a year of pleasantness, a year of health and happiness. And for that reason, we do like to incorporate honey into a lot of our recipes. And what we're going to do now is start our recipe. Now I will tell you, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see. I'll tell you what the ingredients are so you can prepare these in advance. We're going to be using 3/4 of a cup of orange juice, and you can see I've got something in my orange juice, and I'll tell you about that when I get to that list of ingredients. I have honey that we're going to be using. I have the zest of 1 orange, and I already zested my orange, and I have it covered with plastic wrap because I didn't want it to dry out. So there's the zest of the orange, and I'm going to show you, this is my zester that I used on my orange. There are many, many different kinds of zesters, microplanes on the market. This is the one I happen to prefer. And we are also going to use 1 egg, which I've already cracked and put into a little bowl. And those of you that have cooked with me before and watched my YouTubes know that I always say crack your egg beforehand. You want to make sure that there's no blood spot in there, which would make it not kosher and not be allowed to be used. You also want to make sure that there's no eggshell in there. And if there is an eggshell in there, you probably might remember that I've said, don't stick your fingers in there, don't stick a spoon in there. It's very slippery, you can't get the eggshell out. Instead, take the broken eggshell that you've used to crack the egg into the dish and fish out the eggshell using the broken eggshell. That is the best and easiest way to get it out. All right, the next ingredient that we're going to use is a box of gingerbread mix. Now, I want to tell you that I had a difficult time finding gingerbread mix. This is not the time of year where they have it on the shelves in the supermarket. I had to go to Amazon, and it came as a 2-pack, which was fine because then I could make the recipe twice. So probably in later October, beginning of November, you'll be able to find gingerbread mix on the shelf. But if you want to make this recipe, you'll have to do what I did, which is go to Amazon and see about buying your gingerbread mix online. And last but not least, let me take a little sip of water here. As a 1/2 cup of dried fruit or chocolate chips. Now I said that my orange juice had something in it, and as you can see, I've got dried apples in there. Again, continuing with the theme of apples and honey, I'm letting my apples soak to make sure that they'll be nice and soft for this recipe. I'm going to digress for a minute or so. When I was living back in suburban Philadelphia, our synagogue, Knesset Israel, always had a large display of honey cakes. After Yom Kippur was over, as people were leaving, break the fast, there was juice on the table, water on the table, and different kinds of honey cakes. As sisterhood president, I had the pleasure of ordering the honey cakes, and the bakery that we would order them from had a variety of honey cakes. There was plain honey cake, there was chocolate chip honey cake, and my personal favorite was the dried fruit honey cake. And I used to make sure I had 2 slices of that before I went out of the door to go home and, with my family and friends and have break the fast. So that's where the idea came from, of adding dried fruit or chocolate chips to the honey cake. Use your imagination. You can use dried cherries, dried apricots, dried raisins, golden raisins, you know, the list is endless, and I have apples, dried apples. So what I did was I cut them into little pieces because the apple slices were probably about 2 inches long, and you don't want to have a long piece of apple in your honey cake. So I divided them into 3 or 4 chunks, and dropped them into the orange juice. Now the orange juice, I will tell you about this, called for 3/4 of a cup of orange juice. After I zested the orange, and I already showed you the orange juice, I went over to my juicer and I squeezed the oranges so I had fresh orange juice. Nothing wrong with using bottled orange juice, but as long as I was already zesting an orange and I had the orange available, I juiced the orange, and I think I got about a 1/2 cup out of the orange. It was a pretty large one, and then I just added a 1/4 cup of water to it to make the 3/4 of a cup. When I go to use this in the cake, what I'm going to do is, you'll see me doing this in a couple of minutes, I'm going to pour this through a strainer and get the liquid in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-measure the orange juice because I need 3/4 of a cup of liquid to add. And what's going to happen is that the apples will have absorbed some of that liquid. So I'm going to re-measure 3/4 of a cup of liquid into the cup. So we'll do that in a couple of minutes. Okay, my oven is already preheated to 350 degrees, and I have greased and floured a normal, regular size 9x4-inch loaf pan. And when you go to grease your loaf pan, be very, very careful that you get the corners in the bottom, you get up the sides, those little corners there. And when you flour, I like to do mine over the trash can because it can get pretty messy when you dump the flour in and you're starting to shake it all around. So if you do it over the trash can, you don't have to worry about your countertop or your floor. It'll go right into the trash can. Oh, one ingredient I forgot to mention, 1 teaspoon of vanilla. The original recipe that I'm using now called for coffee as the liquid. Now, coffee and gingerbread mix were delicious, and the honey was delicious, but as my daughter told me when she tasted it, it tastes like gingerbread. It did not taste like a honey cake. The coffee and the gingerbread together are both very, very strong flavors. They totally mask the flavor of the honey. So since I had done that, I decided I had to change this recipe. What can I do to lighten the flavor so that the gingerbread isn't overpowering? And what I decided was orange juice and orange zest and the honey. The honey has a lovely floral scent to it, and it adds a certain sweetness. The orange juice and the orange zest also add a very, very lovely flavor, light enough that it now turns this into a honey cake and not a gingerbread cake. The gingerbread does not compete with the other flavors. Okay. So as I said, the oven is preheated and I've zested the orange. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to take my very large bowl. You probably don't need a bowl as large as this, but I'm using a very large bowl because I just want to make sure nothing drips out over the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the egg to the bowl, and to it I'm going to add the orange zest, which has been covered and is still nice and moist. All right, let me add that. That off to the side, and here's my egg and my orange zest. I like to mix the orange zest with the egg or with some kind of liquid that I'm going to be adding, because the oils from the orange zest tend to make it clump up, and if you add it to a dry mix such as the gingerbread mix, it will just stick to it, and it's really hard to mix it around. Mixing it like this makes it so much easier. So you can see it's, you know, it's incorporated. The egg is nice and viscous, and it's incorporated with the orange zest. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to take the apples, which have been soaking I'm going to let it all drip out. And those apples actually look like I chopped them from a fresh apple. They have really absorbed a lot of liquid. let's see, looks pretty good. I'm gonna give it a little squeeze to see if there's any more liquid coming out. And then I'm going to take that bowl and I'm going to pour the liquid. All right. Put it down over here so it won't drip. And I'm gonna pour the liquid back inside. And let's see how much liquid it actually absorbed. So here's the 3/4 mark up here. And right now it's even below 2/3. It's between 1/2 and 3/4. So what I'm gonna do is I am going to add enough water. Oh, wait a minute. Here's my water to make it 3/4 of a cup. All right, let me turn it around so I can see it now. And that is at 3/4 of a cup. Okay, so it really did, the apples really did absorb a lot. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my vanilla. I'm gonna add a teaspoon of vanilla. Has a lovely, lovely fragrance. Oops. All right. And I'm going to mix it around a little bit, okay? And add it to the liquid. All right, now I'm gonna add the honey. Now, honey, we need 1/4 cup, but what I'm gonna do is before I pour the honey into the cup is I'm gonna spray it with cooking spray. If you want your honey to slide out easily, you really need to spray your measuring cup. Honey is very thick and it does not pour easily. And the whole purpose of making this is so that you can get the honey into the bowl. So I'm gonna put a very generous 1/4 cup in here and let's see if it works out as I hope. A little bit more. That's a lot of honey. All right, there we go. Let's see how easily this pours out. Ah, it did. It did what it needed to do. So keep in mind that little cooking tip. Spray your measuring cup or your measuring spoons if you're using honey. And I would say that really came out easily. All right, so let's put these to the side. And we now have our liquid ingredients and our orange zest in the bowl. They're all incorporated. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the gingerbread mix. We don't need the box anymore. And I'm going to add it. I'm just checking. I have orange juice, honey, the zest, the egg, the dried fruit, not yet, and the vanilla. All right. The dried fruit always goes in last, or chocolate chips if you're using them. They would go in last because you want everything in the bowl to incorporate. And if you added the dried fruit, it would stick to the mix, or if you were doing it from scratch, it would stick to the flour in the bowl. Now the recipe, when I wrote up the recipe, I said stir it until it's well mixed and then stir it vigorously. So right now I'm not doing a vigorous stir. I'm still just mixing it all together, making sure that everything is incorporated. And you'll notice that there are still lumps of the mix. That's okay. When they go into bake, they fall apart. I'm going to give it a little push against the side of the bowl. And I can see some of them are, you can see that the flour inside them is opening up because I see little white granules in there. So far, this is easy enough that if you have children or grandchildren, you certainly can get them to help you with mixing. And that's one of the reasons why I like to use a big bowl like this, so that I can demonstrate to you that if you have children that are going to be helping, or if you're doing a vigorous stir, it won't go slopping out over the edges. All right, I think this is pretty good. All right, still have some lumps of gingerbread in there, but that's quite all right. It's like when you make pancakes. They tell you to stir, but it doesn't matter if it's not all incorporated. All right, let me add. These are the apples. And you can see they really do look like fresh apples because they have been sitting in the liquid for a while. Here's another little hint that I want to point out to you. I'm just going to let this sit for a second. If when you put your apples in, mine have been sitting probably for a good 45 minutes. When you put your dried fruit in, usually you put it into warm water, and then it takes about 15 minutes for it to become less hard. It becomes softer when you put it into warm water. If when you put the apples or your dried fruit in and you let them sit for 15 minutes in the orange juice like I suggested, if they're still kind of chewy, take one out with a fork, chew on it, and if it feels like it's still a little too dry and you want it to be moister, take your measuring cup and put it into the microwave. Turn your microwave on for 15 seconds. It'll warm up the liquid slightly, and then just let it sit for another couple of minutes in that warm liquid, and it will soften up. I didn't have to do that today because like I said, I had actually taken it out to prepare, and it was sitting for probably 45 minutes. So it really, really plumped up beautifully. But keep in mind, the microwave is certainly an option if you need to get your fruit plumped up quickly. All right, now glass is back on so I can make sure. I'm going to take my pan, and you can see this is pretty well incorporated. All right, here we go. I'm going to pour it in. And it has that lovely honey cake color that we all know and love. All right, now I'm going to use my spatula to get every bit of delicious goodness out of here. Okay. I know everybody has a favorite honey cake recipe from their bubby, from their mother, from their aunt Sylvia, from their friend down the street. This is just another one for you to think about using. And like I said, it's easy. The hardest part might be finding the gingerbread mix. But you can do it either without the addition of the dried fruit. Having chocolate chips in it certainly is an option for those of you that enjoy chocolate, and I think the chocolate will match up very, very nicely with the flavors of the honey cake. All right, and here's the honey cake ready to go into the oven. So I'm going to put this into the oven for about 35 to 40 minutes. I made one previously a couple of days ago, and that one took every bit of 40 minutes to bake. I had toothpicks at the ready right by the stove, so I started to check, and it definitely took all of 40 minutes to bake. So you'll see how your oven heats up and whether you need 35 or 40 minutes or even a little bit more. But as long as the toothpick comes out and it's moist and you can still see the cake batter on it, back in the oven and just keep an eye on it. All right, so I will see you back here shortly, and I'm going to put this in the oven to bake right now. Welcome back. Well, as you can see, we have our little table set up here for Rosh Hashanah celebration. We have our apples, Golden Delicious and a Red Delicious apple, and we have our little apple spoon and our jar of honey. We have some beautiful flowers in fall colors, and we even have our honey cake sliced and ready to be served. And you can see the chunks of apples, the delicious apples that have plumped up nicely inside there. You will definitely enjoy eating, serving, and preparing this honey cake recipe with apples and vanilla. And I certainly hope that you and your family and friends and all those whom you hold dear will have a very, very happy and joyous New Year. Shana Tova Umituka. May you have a very happy and sweet New Year.